Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras here with ILTV's Morning Briefing. Two incidents in the West Bank last night have now aroused the attention of Israeli police and security forces after stones were thrown at an Israeli car on Route 90 and a stun grenade was thrown at police. In the first incident last night, a 35-year-old individual was lightly wounded after stones were thrown at his car on Route 90 near the West Bank village of Sinjir. Later, in JALJULIA, a stun grenade was lobbed at the doorway of a police station. Thankfully, no injuries were reported and police are investigating, but initial investigations suggest a criminal and not nationalistic or terrorism-related motive behind the attack. In fact, police believe the incident to somehow be linked to a string of recent shootings at the Ayalon and Hadarim prisons. Shots were fired towards the Hadarim prison last week, followed by another drive-by shooting 2 days later at Ayalon. There were no injuries reported, though, and two suspects from JALJULIA have already been arrested in connection to the crimes. The suspects are alleged members of the Palestinian crime syndicate run by gang leader Odeh Coutier, and Coutier supposedly ordered the shootings after the prisons refused his request to attend his brother's funeral, in addition to an alleged spat between Coutier and his jailers. Coutier and members of his gang have additionally been convicted of murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, extortion, and a host of other offenses. It seems that fires within the government keep popping up faster than they can be put out, as Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit has now made clear that there is no way the courts will approve another extension for voting on the HAREDI conscription bill. Speaking to cabinet ministers on Sunday, Mandelblit said that an extension could not be requested anyway, as the current December 2nd deadline is itself already an extension. So the problem for Netanyahu here is that he delayed the issue in efforts to avoid angering his religious coalition members, but now that there are no more delays, Netanyahu no longer has the majority necessary to pass reforms anyway. And if a solution isn't passed by Sunday, then the government will be left with two options: to draft ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students by the thousands, or to stand in violation of the law. Perhaps to his benefit, though, at least Netanyahu is acting defense minister as well, following Avigdor Lieberman's resignation, meaning that no one can force Netanyahu to enforce the draft or initiate early elections. But speaking of Lieberman's resignation, that brings us to another one of the coalition's so-called fires. When Lieberman left the coalition, the security cabinet was left with too many members in relation to the full cabinet. That means that the security cabinet has been operating in violation of Israeli law for the better part of 3 weeks. To solve this crisis, Prime Minister Netanyahu downgraded ministers Yuval Steinitz and Zev Elkin to be alternating security cabinet members. That means that they'll trade between voting rights and an observer status in the security cabinet month to month. But critics from the opposition have already called this decision a mockery of the security cabinet itself. Following Chadian President Déby's historic visit to Israel this week, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has now announced plans to return the courtesy by flying to the African nation of Chad, quote, within the coming weeks. Though an official date has not yet been set, this announcement again comes nearly 50 years since diplomatic relations between the two countries were severed. And while President Déby also made clear that his normalizing ties with Israel was independent of his criticisms regarding the Palestinian conflict, both he and Netanyahu still lauded all the benefits that their partnership will afford too. Further, in addition to partnerships in agriculture, medicine, and the economy, new deals between Israel and Chad are also widely expected to include weapons and military aid in the fight against terrorist groups like Boko Haram and the Islamic State. Additionally, according to Channel 10 News, normalizing with Chad is just one of many steps in gaining closer ties with other Muslim-majority states like Mali, Sudan, Niger, Oman, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and more. To that end, a secret meeting last year between an Israeli envoy and Sudanese officials in Istanbul, Turkey, has now been revealed, where the delegations discussed the establishing of ties. And there have been many meetings, both secret and not, between Israeli and Arab world leaders over just the past few months, including Netanyahu's trip to Oman and Culture Minister Regev's visit to Abu Dhabi. Although there has been a continuous debate regarding women joining combat units in the military, the debate hasn't stopped ladies in the IDF from making history. And it's now been revealed that 6 female recruits will serve on the Navy's new missile ship, the SAR 6, as soon as it's ready. Until it becomes operational in 2019, though, the soldiers will serve on the SAR 5, and regardless, this is the first time females will serve as naval fighters on the Navy missile ships. The Naval Officers Course was open to women in 1998, and in 2014, women were enabled to become naval vessel commanders, but there hasn't been any female soldiers on missile ships before these 6 female recruits. Well, now the soldiers will do a 6-month-long basic training course on base in Haifa, and according to the IDF, the soldiers will serve in command and control centers on their respective naval vessels. The military has also stated that the new SAR 6 is set to defend strategic assets such as the country's offshore natural gas reserves, that and maintaining the quiet in seas near and far, along with destroying any enemy war fleets. The SAR 6 will also be the fastest ship in the SAR series, with a maximum speed of 26 knots, and will be manned by a crew of 70 sailors. Finally, the ship will have 2 naval Iron Dome missile defense launchers and a range of other defensive capabilities as well. That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.